a rough rule of thumb of like maximum amount of time per thing?
You started recording and then all of a sudden it got very blurry. Let's try that one more time.
Do you want to set, whether we say it out loud in the intro or not, do you want to set like a rough cap on how long we talk about any one thing?
Yeah, sure. Let's do 5 minutes.
That's perfect. And do you want me to be the timekeeper? Do you want to do it?
Yeah, you can be the timekeeper. That would be great. Okay. I also want you to be the introer, but I guess I'm going to do that. So
well, just
feel free to pass things off to me. Okay. Sounds good. Hello and welcome back to, I don't know what we're calling this podcast, but let's call it Zooming In for now, which is the Guelph podcast, brought to you by the Carl Bialik and me, David Goldenberg, the founders of Guelph Magazine. And we are talking about, I don't know, all sorts of stuff here at our podcast. We're trying out a new format this week in which we will ask each other for predictions and then discuss. And then we're going to hope to go through 5 or 6 or I don't know how many, 7 or 8 predictions this week. They can be big predictions. When is the world going to be end? They can be small predictions. When are we going to eat dinner? They can be all things in between. And thank you for listening. We look forward to your feedback about this format. And let's get this started. Carl, would you like to ask the first prediction today?
Sure. On what date will there be the next event in the United States where 50,000 or more people gather in the same place at the same time?
I am going to guess June 1st, and I'm going to guess that it is a Trump rally. And I think that it will be deliberately to poke a finger in the eye of people who don't think that that's a good idea. And it will be a mass gathering and at a giant stadium to basically show the virus who's boss, I guess. And I think that anything that's not a deliberately political rally about social distancing is probably, I would not guess 50,000 people getting together until 2021.
That's a really smart answer. I hadn't been thinking about the political element and the sort of defiance entailed. And I guess there's even, the possibility that at some point enough people in the same place think they're immune and that becomes like a celebration to gather together as well. So maybe it's a little unfair for the second person to change their prediction, but I like where you're going with it. June 1st still feels too soon. I feel like the conventions are more towards the end of the summer, and that would be around the time when something like that could happen. 50,000 is still a really big number where I don't even know how many Trump rallies in the past have had that many. On the other hand, to your point, maybe people go out of their way to have such a big one just to make a statement. And, I think there are people in all parts of the political spectrum who are excited to celebrate victory, as anyone is after a tough fight. There are incredible celebrations and gatherings after wars are won. This is a kind of war. So I think that impulse will be widespread. There could be places in the country that, feel safer, faster, sooner. So I don't know, maybe I'm just going to say like August 15th. But I think you're right that it'll have to be for some bigger reason, maybe for a campaign, maybe also like a fundraiser, maybe a fundraiser to help pay for people's medical bills or whatever comes out of this crisis. I don't think I would want to be one of them for a very long time, even if I thought I was immune. What about you?
Well, if you had said 10,000 people as opposed to 50,000 people, I feel like there are stadiums in the country that are big enough that maybe with like a little bit of squeezing of social distancing, you could do it. And so, maybe in the Rose Bowl or something, I don't know if the Rose Bowl is big enough for this, but like you could do, you could have 10,000 people in there to watch a football game or something like that. If you said, basically you only sold tickets to, one out of every, whatever it is, 12 seats. I don't actually know how that would work, but that could work. But yes, I think 50,000, you have to be deliberately proving a point at this point because there's not a big enough place to get people together. Even like a big music
Like an
You call this-
outdoor festival would still
A
be
festival.
pretty
I was going to call it a
tight.
music convention, but I guess people don't go to music conventions. Yes, a music festival.
With like name tags and
That's
networking.
right.
Totally.
Welcome to Lollapalooza. Yes, I think that it is. I certainly wouldn't go to one of those. I think I could be a late adopter to mass gatherings, even if it was something I really wanted to go to, like a soccer game or the Olympics or something.
Yeah, I think even your scenario of 10,000 to 50,000 person stadium, even if you could guarantee that people adhere to the 6 feet and there was enough space for them to do it, I still find that estimate of 6 feet to be so rough. And if there's one person who happens to shed a lot over a great distance and you're together in that space for that long where it can kind of hop. I mean, we've heard of these single events that were these major catalysts, and it just seems like tempting fate to assume that distance just above that sort of arbitrary threshold would get it done. So I still don't think I would be one of them or urge any of my loved ones to be one of them, unless they, again, felt confident that they were immune, which is a whole separate sort of prediction to make perhaps further down the show. Okay, your turn. Unless you have more to add on this, it's your turn to suggest a prediction.
Well, I've got a question that you probably never heard of. You certainly didn't suggest it in the run-up to this this podcast, and that is, who do you think is going to win the NBA championship this year, Carl?
This year in 2020. So not this season, because it's, theoretically the season could extend into, maybe they'll finish it up in January and then start the next one. I suspect the NBA season will not finish and no one will win it. That's my prediction. How about you?
I think it's going to be the Lakers. And I also think that the NBA season won't finish, but they'll just give it to the Lakers because that's what they like to do. No, I actually think they will finish it. I think we're going to do some sort of modified version of this where we try to do like some, reality TV. Everybody goes into a hotel and play like a big tournament or something like that. And I think that the Lakers are well positioned for a something like that because I think, as you know, probably, or as you've thought about more than me, I should say, really long playoff series are, they tend to favor certain types of people over and certain types of team makeups. And I think that when there's a shorter playoff and then I actually don't know how this works, so maybe I'm wrong, but I think that pure talent probably is, and someone who can basically take over a game and actually get you there. And is more likely to win one of those. But now that I say it out loud, I'm not sure that that's true. But for some reason, I see LeBron saying, "Hey, I don't have much time left in this. Like, I'm going to squeeze out all of my energy, and if I do that, I can win 4 games. Maybe I can't win 16 games, but I can win 4 games." But.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to predict exactly. It's sensible to say LeBron is, one of the older of the biggest stars in the NBA, and that a shorter playoff might on balance favor someone who's older. Not that he's shown his age particularly.
Right.
One thing that I think is a real unknown, there are 2 real unknowns for me. One, let's assume that there's a champion and there's some kind of playoff and that the Lakers are even contenders. I think it's a real unknown how this kind of a layoff affects different players. And some of it might come down to who they happen to be nearby right now and who they're able to practice with.
Who had the gym in their house.
Yeah, seriously. And so there was that article in the Wall Street Journal about how Steph Curry had to build a hoop outside his home so he could keep shooting. So I think that's definitely a factor. And, it could be for older players, like some time off is great because it lets them heal some of those nagging injuries. That's one of the theories for why Roger Federer came back so strong after a long break. I think the other big unknown is when I say I don't think there'll be an NBA champion, I don't necessarily mean there won't be more NBA play of some kind. But in order to get enough of the teams with enough of their players in the same places that they can play each other and have it meaningfully count as games between those franchises where they'll all agree that this is official, as opposed to just providing some kind of entertainment, like something more like an all-star exhibition kind of deal. I think there's a lot of room between no games and enough of the players in the right place to actually have a champion.
Did you watch any of that horse stuff on ESPN?
No, although I love the idea and I basically it slipped my mind. Did you?
I watched a few of the highlights, and it was hard because I kept being mad at people who had to they're facing each other, and some people had a really nice home gym, and some people were outside shooting in the wind and stuff, and I kept being like, this should be worth more because it was because it was swirling or whatever.
Well, it's like
And
how in everyday life we sort of, weight people who have more adversity. We weight their accomplishments more heavily and give them a lot of advantages. I mean, it should be the same for NBA for sure.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that it was, but it was a really interesting phenomenon, and I think that that it was obviously done to make it less, more amateurish, and they put players against, retired players and WNBA players versus NBA players, and maybe that those are sort of fair for horse. But I thought it was done intentionally so that you couldn't actually compare people like for like, and so maybe that would be harder to do if to actually have meaningful outcomes if it feels like there's this this difference in how people are able to prepare or whatever, and if all the games took place at a hotel in Vegas or whatever they're thinking of right now, then maybe that would be easier for people who live nearby, so they can have more interactions with their families and stuff like that. And I think that so there's certainly gonna be a giant asterisk next to this season, no matter what happens. But I do think that the NBA will find a way to get a trophy to somebody to make it feel like fans feel like there's some continuity there.
Maybe an Astros-shaped trophy.
Yeah, there you go.
Really
Exactly.
emphasize the point. All right, so we're out of time. I think so far you're more optimistic on both, which is, although Lakers winning is sort of dystopian, but we'll still call it optimistic to have a champion. I'm going to shift. I guess we're talking about predictions in an age of great uncertainty affected by the virus, because that it affects any predictions we make. This one certainly is. I don't know offhand what the turnout was in the last presidential race. Maybe if we prepared a little more, I would, but it doesn't really matter. My question to you is, whatever it was, what will the turnout be in November or whenever the presidential election is relatively? So you could say, 5 percentage points lower, 10 percentage points higher. What will the change in turnout be from 2016 in the general election for the president?
So I'm going to start that by saying I think there was about 125 million people voted in the last presidential election.
Let's do like percentage of registered or eligible or something, just in case the denominator changed. Just to
I gotcha. All right. Fine, Carl, if you insist. I think that there will be a higher percentage of registered voters will vote in this election, and I think that
by how much?
Like I don't actually know how much it often varies, but let's say that it will be, let's say, 10% higher, like hugely higher than it has been in the past, and that it will be because of Joe Biden is the most inspiring candidate that's ever been brought forth to run in an election. No, I think it's because it will feel even more so than 2016. Like if you are not participating in this process, then you're not participating in the future of democracy.
Okay. I'm going to say it's 15 points lower. And I think the reason is that everything we're going through is making us all reassess the upsides and downsides to everything, and downsides of a lot of things that often don't include death now do. And as much as we're told that it's our civic duty to vote and our vote counts, for people like you and me who vote in states where it's basically guaranteed that one party is going to win all the electoral votes, unless there's a really important close other race, I think the upside is going to feel much lower. I think if we're going to use this idea of big asterisks, I think we should probably make big asterisks and just hold them up on camera. But I think the big uncertainty here is, do people get it together so that it's easier to vote safely without waiting in line with a whole bunch of people and going to a crowded place? I think it'll probably happen in some places, but not enough to make up for the fact that people just do the math and say, you know what, Biden or Trump doesn't need my vote in this state because we know which way the state is going anyway, and my vote actually doesn't count.
That's an interesting theory, but you're wrong, and that's because of a technicality, which is registered voters, which is no, I don't actually know, but my assumption is that a lot of there's going to be some legislation that comes through before the election, and I assume that some of it is going to make it easier to vote by mail in certain places, and in other places is going to make it less easy to vote at all, and a lot of people are going to be purged from the rolls, et cetera. And so I think that in places where there is, same-day registration, vote by mail sort of things, there's going to be a huge push to get those votes out, and it could be that, if you, as we saw in Wisconsin, that I think maybe the overall vote was down a little bit, but vote by mail was way up, and that was with just a couple weeks to prepare, sort of thing. My sense is that we're going to know in a couple, relatively soon, whether or not we can get vote by mail, in more places or not, and the places that there is vote by mail, I think there's going to be a huge push to get as many people to vote as possible, and I think that that is going to increase voting overall. But I also think that we're also going to know, like, this is super morbid, but like people are going to die from having to go on out and voted in Wisconsin, and I think that as that becomes very obvious to people, like, and we realize that, hey, it's so much better to stay in your house than to socially distance yourself a few feet away from someone else when you're out, like in terms of that, like, yeah, people are not going to risk it even in full, PPE or whatever to go to a voting booth. So maybe you're right, but my sense is that there's going to be a huge organization around voting by mail, and that's going to end up tilting people to vote even more. And I also think that there is this, at least my sense is that a lot of people are going to want to participate in this particular election, even more so than previous elections, because it really does. I think the stakes will feel really high by that point. But I don't know. We also didn't bet on whether there's going to be an election, so.
Well, that could be the next one. I mean, I think that one big variable that neither of us talked about, it's we're basically at time, but just to say it explicitly, if one candidate is up in the polls by 15 points, then it feels even less necessary to like figure out a new way of voting and everything else. That's rare in our very polarized and sort of set in place electorate kind of setting that we're in now, but it's always possible at this point. So much can happen between now and then with both candidates and what we learn about them and their capabilities. So I think I think we need like a close race for your prediction to be right, but we could well have one.
Nice. Am I up now? Yeah. I should have probably thought of something to ask, but I've got a question that's related to basically the fact that everyone is getting educated via Zoom now, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to pose it as a prediction question. But I guess, how about, do you think that applications to regular colleges are going to increase or decrease next year, and by what percent? Or this year?
By regular colleges.
Regular 4-year universities that, I guess they're not regular, but the college admission process is going to, where you go and live in a dorm, for 4 years for these sort of like, whatever they're called, fancier colleges.
I think this will be a hard one to measure exactly, but I think I know the category you mean. I mean, it's tricky because I think every one of those schools is probably going to change to some degree, and some of them a lot. So, you could have a separate question about, like, we both went to Yale, so we could choose Yale. Like, how much is the percentage of students who live on campus going to change from like last September to this September? So the schools themselves are changing. To your point, I don't think in this year's class it will change much. Like maybe it'll be a drop of a couple of points or something. But I think the experience of the students going to the same school, including new students who are applying for the first time, like in your scenario, and students who are coming back, is going to be really different. I think, in some cases, there are people who have various reasons that their immune systems are compromised, so they have to be more careful, and schools are going to accommodate them, and it's just going to be like a different educational experience, even as some students go back on campus. That's my assumption, because it's so soon that schools are already planning, and so they have to be prepared for things like that because we don't know where we're going to be in September. So yeah, my guess is it won't immediately affect admissions this year, but schools will change. possibly some of those changes will stick because it'll turn out it works better for people even when there isn't a pandemic, and that will then in turn affect future years admissions rates more. Plus, you've got all these cohorts of kids, not just the high school seniors, but all the way, to kids in preschool who are having these new experiences that could shape how they and their parents think about school for the next generation.
Yeah, and I do think that there's something of like, this idea that at least for these, I don't know, for Yale, let's say, right, which is a very expensive school to go to, and a lot of that I think is sort of mystique related in terms of like you're going to have this experience, interacting with all these other kids, and that you'll meet all of these wonderful professors and stuff like that. But when you actually have to do it over Zoom, you realize that it's like you go to class 8 hours a week, and you eat bad food and you gossip with people. Like maybe that's not worth, whatever it is, $30,000 a year or whatever.
If only. I think it's way more
well,
now.
I guess perhaps, yes. But maybe like basically the idea is that we're actually going to try to attribute, figure out where this money goes and whether it's worth it. And that like, if I can go watch an awesome educational YouTube video from this lecturer, does he need to be doing it in person? Is that like a real thing that's valuable? Is sitting next to some other person who's also quite bright, like do any actual good for me? Can I do that same thing, virtually? And do I need to, pay for the pleasure of doing so? And my sense is that this is going to be that we basically punctured the mystique of a lot of these fancier places, and that basically a lot of it was was this idea that there was some inherent value in getting it, beyond just having the name that you can put on your resume later on, and that we're going to realize that basically all you're doing is just paying for that name, and maybe other people don't need to value that as much either.
Yeah, and I mean, you're raising some fascinating questions here. Like, I think these top universities and all the successful private universities are like businesses and are good at adapting, and they've already sort of adapted into the online learning space before all this happened. So I think they might even see this as an opportunity to kind of, maybe the mystique is less, but they can get it to more people and like tap into more people. And I mean, look at the sort of cable model adapting to streaming model. Like, imagine if you're good enough to like get into Yale for math and you take your math classes there, and then your English application isn't quite as impressive by the standards that whatever standards you use to judge. So you take those classes from somewhere else, or you want to take it with your friend from high school, so you take it by video from some local school. And then you can suddenly live at home, save a ton of money because so much of the cost is about the room and board and the travel. You can continue to have the social life you might have had in college, but you'll have it with your friends at home that you otherwise would have had to say goodbye to. I mean, I could really see people sort of creating their own college experience, and colleges having to get with the program and sort of coming up with some kind of consortium and combined degree that makes this all possible. And did it ever really make sense for your social life from 18 to 21 to be so closely tied to your academic life? I mean, it kind of wasn't, except it was all in the same place. It's not like you and I, did we have a single class together in college? I don't think so.
No.
So, I mean, I think a great thing would be lost, because one of the really great things about schools is it brings people together from lots of places, including around the world. But if travel just seems way less worth it than it used to, that's just going to be a fact of life even beyond school.
Yep. Nope. Totally agree with that. I think that I am fascinated to see what happens. I think that there's a lot of things about at least the kind of higher education that we got that could be dropped without losing too much. And then there are a lot of wonderful things that I think were super valuable, but that are not actually valued as a society, like eating stale pizza late at night while putting out a newspaper or something like that. You know what I mean? Like that was super interesting and useful, but not something that I think, my parents or a student loan officer would be like, this is why we're, putting money into this thing, I think it's because it's, this idea that you're going to go, I don't know, do something wonderful with your life once you get educated in this fashion or something like that.
My turn.
All right.
Will the United States get universal basic income, and if so, in what year?
Yes. the United States will get UBI, and it will happen way sooner than I thought. By I'm going to say 2200.
So 180 years from now?
180 years from now, everyone in the United States will have universal basic income, and it will be way below living wage, and it will basically be subject to creditors well before it actually gets into your account.
Just go straight to your landlord.
That's right.
So if that was way before you thought, what did you used to think?
I used to think so. The pandemic has changed a lot of my priors. I've had to update them, and one is that I didn't think the government could ever be convinced to give people paychecks in any real meaningful way, and it's sort of happening now. And that's I don't even think what you could call what's happening now universal basic income. Even for that month or whatever. And I think that basically everyone in the world, everyone in the country has been forced to live in their house and have no way of getting income, and that's the best we can do. And I feel like in a lot of ways our ability to have these kind of conversations is almost broken, and that I can't think of a way that in the near term that would ever be agreed to by enough people to extend that to a point when people have a way to make money another way. So I still don't see it happening anytime soon. But I think that basically this idea that a major natural disaster, I don't know if it's natural, but whatever, it's a major thing can force us to get there pretty quickly. Makes me think that by the year 2200, when like the Terminators have come back and we're all cowering and other things, maybe we'll figure out a way to get people actual cash, which is, we know from now 60 years of research that's the best way to make people's lives better, is to give them cash. So I'm that doesn't sound super optimistic, but I'm way more optimistic about it now than I ever was. So what about you, Carl?
I'll say yes, and 2050. My thinking is that I think both of us are thinking the same way, that there's clearly been so many holes exposed in the so-called safety net, and it's sort of become nonpartisan to just recognize that you got to get people cash if you're telling them they have to stay home and not do their jobs, or if they have no choice because their jobs are gone because of the nature of the job and the nature of its sort of possibility of existing in this current climate. And I don't think that means that overnight anything changes in the long term in the US, but I think the things that are happening to our economy are happening in other places where UBI has already been a much more serious possibility, which means I think it's going to come to other places much sooner than expected, which would mean soon. And once other countries have things and they're tested and it turns out that they don't end things the way that the most pessimistic or cynical forecasters in our country say, it becomes less tenable to make the case against it, and eventually it happens. I agree it's likely the first instantation is going to be inadequate and sort of UBI in name only, but I think it'll still technically count and gradually, in fits and starts, get to be closer to something that is a living income.
Nice. I think that the other thing that the reason that I thought we would get to a UBI sort of thing, which is sort of like the Yang Gang sort of idea, which is that we're all going to be automated out of sort of jobs that are manual labor basically. That doesn't seem to me like a good way for UBI to come in, because it's pretty obvious that it's hard to get the government to care about people that weren't making a ton of money in the first place. But that when if you can have something, if something happens that affects everybody, then maybe you could get people to start thinking about it. Some of these even like Republican senators were sounding sort of like UBI proponents just when they were trying to talk their way into figuring out how they're going to get money to people. It sounded like, well, that's a pretty obvious way to do it. They also sounded like they were into universal healthcare for a little bit there. So I'm not like getting overly excited about it, but I do think that there's it's such an obvious way to do things that it may be at least it'll get talked about more, even if we don't do it. Am I up for the next one, or are we still working on?
No, your turn. Go
All
for it.
right. All right, Carl. We'll change this a little bit. Of your 10 closest friends, we're going to put them all on a scale once they get out of quarantine. Are they going? What percent more or less are they going to weigh than when they went into quarantine?
Wow. Not that it would necessarily change my answer much, but just because I love to be annoying and nitpicky about language. Define like getting out of quarantine. What does that entail?
When they are basically on their way to the 50,000 person Trump rally on June 1st.
Right.
Let's say June 1st.
Okay. 2% heavier. How about you?
Yeah, I think there's going to be some people that are going to come out of this much fitter. But I think also I'm going to go with.
Yeah, that was all muscles. If I wasn't.
Oh yeah, exactly. But I think that yeah, and I would go all the way up to 5% because I think there's been this great combination of stress eating and baking that is that's going on. That's really doing it. And just some personal thoughts about that. I guess 5%. Yeah, I can definitely do that. But what do you think? What is informing your 2%?
Yeah, well, I mean, I haven't weighed myself or anyone else, so I'm mostly just going on what I know, which is mostly me, and a little bit, I guess, the images of people I see on video, but that's not really a great way to tell, and the stories I hear about, like you said, stress eating and baking. For me, my exercise has gone down to nearly nil and like way lower than it needs to be because there are things you can do at home, and I just never have found those things fun and motivating, so I'm terrible at doing them. So based on my activity going down so low and my eating going down but not nearly as much as my activity went down, my intuition was that my weight would go up significantly. Again, I'm not weighing myself, but I think we all kind of know if our weight is fluctuating a lot in various ways. And I don't think it is. I think I'm kind of where I was at a month. Some of it is it's just not that long a time. I think some of it is unless you're really active, most of your calorie burning is the base rate. I think for most people, like you have to do a lot of exercise to really go way up above that base rate. You would know that stuff better than me, but that's my sense. And I think part of it is there's a lot of things about my normal lifestyle and going out to restaurants and just being out on the streets in New York that amp up my consumption. I mean, it's sort of a miracle to me that anyone in New York who can afford to be obese isn't, just because the temptations on every block are unbelievable. And I like congratulate myself if I only have one unexpected stop in a day to get something delicious. So that's out the window. And that pushes out the window a lot of like my biggest vices that just aren't really available in the current lifestyle. And we're now down to kind of our like non-perishables, and we're still eating well, we're fine, but it gets less exciting over time. It gets more the same, and that makes it easier, I think, to portion control and to just eat reasonably. So it seems I think that so much of all of our health and our weight is governed by various rules of equilibrium, and I think this is sort of kicking in for me. And I'm way over extrapolating because I know myself best right now because we are also physically distant. So, I could be completely off, but that's my sense.
Yeah, I think I would agree with all that. I think the other thing is that there is this I like a good cocktail every once in a while, but that's been something that I can basically usually I was like going out most nights, or I was like whatever, and maybe I would have a few more drinks, but I wouldn't necessarily be at my house, saying like it's 5 o'clock, now like let's cocktail hour, let's have a drink, which I'm basically doing every night. So it's like basically I'm regularly getting this extra couple hundred calories that I wouldn't necessarily get, and I'm certainly not exercising nearly as much. And I think the combination of those things, which is basically like it just adds up pretty quickly. The other thing is that like I am when I do eat at home, I eat pretty regular, like the same meals generally, and we're just not getting the same stuff. And so because I eat the same meals, I'm never like full until like 20 minutes after a meal. But if I eat the same things enough, that I know that I'm gonna be full eventually. So I'll eat my half a chicken, and I'll be like, all right, well I'm not full now. I could probably eat the other half a chicken, but But I know from experience that that's going to make me feel full later. And
It's
now I'm
amazing
just
the things
like,
we can still learn. It's lifelong learning.
but now like it's like, all right, well I've got this giant pan full of noodles that I made. I have no idea whether because I found them in the back of the pantry. I have no idea whether this is going to fill me up. So I'm just going to eat until I'm full, and then like 10 minutes later I feel terrible, but I didn't know that beforehand. I have to learn again, and then I'll find a different pack of noodles. What to try the experiment over again. So it's tough. So yes, I do think that we're all going to plump up for it, but I also think that that's good. I feel like a little bit more padding as we sit in our chairs all day is not so terrible.
The drinking thing is really interesting. I mean, I'm talking to you as I'm drinking a beer. I think my drinking has kind of stayed the same, but the temptation is really strong. It's like we're home anyway. I don't drive, but even just going out can make drinking a little less convenient. Got this liquor cabinet that I never touch, so it's definitely the thought is there. It's just like I don't know. I mean, I love the person I am quarantining with, but like drinking is often about being with different people and going out, and those elements aren't there. So I don't know. I wonder how that's averaging out. I think the popular conception is that drinking is way up, but I haven't seen like definite numbers on that.
It's funny that you mentioned it that way, which is that like that that you often drink when you're being social out, away from your partner or whatever. And like for me, I have all of these we hangouts with or Zooms with friends or whatever, and it feels weird to not be like having a drink and being so like while you're being social with them, that we even call them like cocktail out, whatever.
Right. Happy hour. Yeah.
Happy hours, yeah. And so the idea that I feel like it's my responsibility as because Zooms are awkward anyways and whatever it is, but like to have like a drink and to talk about it and whatever so it's it
That's a
seems
good
to
point.
me like but yeah, that's something that I don't necessarily. I could go on a walk with somebody, or I could do something else with somebody.
But if you're
play
just
some
sitting
tennis,
there at night in front of a
Mhm.
screen, might as well have a drink, and it will,
Right.
yeah, liquid. Not that you need courage, but like liquid awkwardness abater.
Yeah.
That's a great transition because I think we're pretty much in agreement and a little out of time on that one. So I was going to ask you next. I don't know exactly how to word this, so let me just take a stab at it. In 2025, assuming we're both healthy and living somewhat similar lives to what we are now, how many group, not one-on-one like this, but group social get-togethers will you have where everyone is in a different place and on screen throughout the year?
Interesting. I think that hopefully more than I had before this, because it's been really lovely. But I'm gonna say not too many more, because even now things are already falling off after a month. So
Oh,
let's
really?
go with 2. Yeah,
2 for the whole year.
2 for the whole year. Yes.
Yeah.
And but I do think there are specific things that have been awesome for Zooms. Like we did Seder, which is like um, we never think about inviting people that weren't in our same place for that. But
Exactly.
like it's lovely. You get to see your family, but you don't have to travel and stay at your family's house. Like it's great. And and I think that there are other things that are really great to be able to be a part of that you wouldn't. Sadly, I had to go to a funeral that was like distanced, and that was it was really nice to see the whole family there in a way that wouldn't have been able to make it there otherwise. And so there's some things that are really great, and then there are some things that like it's like we were talking about college earlier. I get to see all my college roommates, and that's great.
I did
But
that
that's
too.
not,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's not something that I would do it. And maybe it feels weird that maybe this will become a normal thing to do, and we can do it. But like in a lot of ways, like sending each other like rude memes over group text or whatever filled the bill in some way, and maybe we don't need to do these Zooms, but I don't know. They're very nice. It just feels like maybe it would be awkward if we could like, let's not like actually get together. Let's let's Zoom. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm going to go way higher. I'm going to say like 26, just to say every other week or something.
Uh,
Uh, my experience has been very similar to yours, and just maybe the most extreme example is I'm Jewish, and pretty much every time I've been at a church service, it's been a wedding or a funeral. Until Sunday, one of my colleagues has been telling the rest of us about how his church services are special, and we're mostly not Christian or not religious. So he's like, instead of saying mean things about my religion, maybe come by sometime and check it out. And he lives in California. I live in New York. If I'm in California, it's not going to be the first thing I would probably do on a Sunday. But in New York, it meant for an hour while I was cooking, like, his church was on Zoom on my screen, and it was really interesting. And we had an interesting conversation afterwards about God. Wouldn't have happened. I think that the element of people who normally you just wouldn't see very much, like you and I, because we're not in the same place, suddenly you can see them, is incredible. So for our Seder, it was people all over the country, but it was still kind of like really close relatives. But then I realized the morning of, I could have relatives we used to celebrate with who aren't that close and on the family tree, but who we have all these memories with, to bomb our Seder like halfway through for half an hour. And it was great. And it would have never happened otherwise. So I still think we'll always choose the in-person thing. And I think one thing we will definitely not have anymore when we're not always at home is the kind of confidence that people will be around and will be able to sort of move things around to get in front of a screen, as opposed to like showing up in person. If you're out and about, you're not really going to want to look at your phone for one of these things. You kind of have to be home or in some fixed place. And once you go from like being 100% sure everyone is in that position to being like 70 to 80% sure, it's much harder. But I'm also starting to really appreciate how you can host something, you can invite a group of people, and it's okay if not everyone can make it, because you can just do it another time later. Not everyone has to make it each time. And it's sort of socially awkward depending on the group, in the sense of like it's all or none. But I think that is going to carry over to some extent. Like, hey, on Thursday, I don't really feel like going out. I'm just going to invite this group of friends. And if only one of them is free and we have a drink together, that sounds great. The other X factor for me, which I really want to hear your thoughts on, in 5 years, the technology should be much better. So presumably that would change the equation somewhat, but I don't know exactly what that looks like.
Yeah, I think that there's one of the things that you mentioned, which is this like idea of a happy hour sort of drop by-ness with no social pressure to go, is it's something that we actually have some friends that do this, right? Which is that she said, like, listen, I'm gonna be in this hangout every day from 3 to 5. If you want to drop by, like, come on by. I'm just gonna be hanging out, like, working on some other stuff. Like, I want to, and if you don't want to, don't. And that is lovely. Like, when you wander in, she's excited to see you, and if you don't wander in, it's not a big deal, and it's something to look forward to if you want to plan it, and that's really great. And you're right, like that's not going to happen when everybody's back at work and doing things, or if you always have a 2-hour window where people can come by and you're not doing anything, like that's pretty weird. But like right now, it's really lovely,
You're just going right back to judging people, aren't you? Let's bring the
that's
judgment.
Right. But no, I think it's really. I could see those things happening much more often, these sort of like office hours sort of things. But the more formal things, I think I'll still feel awkward about, and I think I'll still have pretty shitty Wi-Fi even in 2025. I've got Xfinity, and they've shown no inclination to move forward with the time.
Not Infinity, but Xfinity. Yeah, I think yes. Wi-Fi and Bluetooth are going to probably be just as shitty in 2025. Unfortunately, that's going to make a lot of things not possible.
Yeah.
All right, so let's call this the last one, and it's your turn.
All right, last one. Okay. Let's see. Do you think that? What do you think the Hollywood box office is going to look like in 2021? How much do you think it's going to drop from the Hollywood box office of, let's say, 2019?
2019. Yeah, exactly. Got you, 2019. That's a great one. So just to be 100% clear, we're talking about like U.S. first of all, or international?
Let's go U.S. Since that's at least easier for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah, and it has to be like in theater. We're not going to change the rules. Okay.
Yeah, it's not going to be like the Billboard chart where we're suddenly like, oh, well, that was on YouTube. That counts. No.
Yeah. So box office is done by dollars, not by tickets. And there's been a trend anyway to physically distance in theaters even before all this, like fewer seats, more luxury, all that, food at your seats. So it could become even more of a luxury good, even more like focus on the quality of the screening and of the whole experience, the seating. So I think the sort of obvious point is like I think attendance will drop more than box office because I think attendance will really drop because I also think it's one of these cycles where the less it makes sense for people to plan around theaters because you have to plan way in advance in Hollywood. It'll change what people make and what their plan is for it. So you're just going to start planning for a world after theaters. And that change was already happening. So many movies were being commissioned to go straight to streaming. So like it's not a totally new thing. It just changes the pace, I think. So I think if you add all that together, we're talking like a 60% drop. What do you think?
Wow. Well, I was gonna say, I also think it's gonna be very drastic, but I was gonna say 35%, but 60 is huge. And I
60 is
think
huge, yeah.
that I think you've hit on a few of those reasons that that attendance is going to drop. I also think that there's not going to be any movies made very much this year, and so they're not. It's gonna be really hard to make a movie because I
Right.
imagine everything's shut down right now in terms of the production lots and stuff like that. So who knows what's going to be ready to go? And if you by what happened with the writer's strike for regular TV, you know, whatever, it was like it's going to be all reality TV movies or something like that in 2021. So I think they're going to be shittier movies, or James Cameron might finally have finished one of the Avatars or something like that. But like,
or like director's cut, re-release, stuff like that. Yeah.
So I think that's another reason why it will be down.
That's a great point.
And I'm also like very interested in basically like you've always made this claim that hey, sometimes it's actually nicer to be at your TV to watch something, especially now everybody has a giant big screen TV, and they've had the whole quarantine to perfect their setup and finally get that surround sound that they've always talked about, etc.
Perfect their cocktail making at 5 p.m. sharp.
That's right, exactly. They'll be very comfortable in their houses at this point, so I think that may. There's certainly obviously cabin fever and stuff associated with being in your house all the time, but that people will be very comfortable sitting on their couch and watching a movie in a way that maybe they had never really tried to do before. And as you were saying, like, we watched Onward, which we would have, with the kids, which we would have normally gone to the theater to watch. And it was a lovely experience to watch, on our TV at home. And frankly, it was because we felt like we were cheating or something like that to be able to see it, but while it was still at theaters or whatever. But it's, I didn't need to go to, and shell out, $100 or whatever it would cost to go do a family of 4 to the movies. And we, got just as much popcorn and we're just as obnoxious as we would have been there. So like it was great.
You could pause it and go to the bathroom. I think that is a hugely underrated part of watching a movie at home. Yeah, I agree with all that. And I think that, what this raises is, to me, we're still going to want to go outside and do things outside of our homes for sure. But the things that involve going indoors somewhere else and often being with the same people, it will start to like weigh them differently than we used to. And I think, that's going to be, I think the most successful restaurants are going to be the ones who figure out how to make an experience that's really special and different from the home, or serve a food that like you need to be right where it was finished being prepared, right at the moment it was finished being prepared. And I think every business is going to have to think about the home as an even stiffer competitor, with the caveat that you and I have comfortable homes that we can afford and we're privileged to have, and we've already set up pretty well. And there are people right now who are desperate to get out of their homes and they're not safe and all those things. And like, They'll still love to have an excuse to get out. And for them, if movies really do become a luxury good and they can't afford it, that'll be yet another way that this has made things even more unequal. So hope that those options still exist for people whose homes aren't sanctuaries.
Yep. Agreed. I also think that you were saying the movie experience will be different. I think that maybe there's socially distanced movies like actually like drive-in theaters or something like that could come back. That would be a fun thing to do, I think, again, in a way that
I think they have been actually. Like
really?
There aren't that many of them, but I think the interest in them shot up. I mean, I think a lot of people are figuring out you can physically distance from other people by hopping in your car and driving places, and that's an obvious place to drive, but people are just going for joy rides, and I've heard a lot of examples of people doing that, so it makes sense to go see a movie.
I've got a good one about that. So today my sister calls me. My sister lives in Nashville, Tennessee, and she's like, guess where I am? And I was like, I don't know. She says, Alabama. And I was like, What? Why? And she said, Milo's, which is our local fast food chain in Alabama, is for the first time ever selling selling their secret sauce in bottles, just for this week. It's sort of like a fundraiser for doctors and healthcare workers. And she was like, I wasn't doing anything else. I'm socially distanced in my car. What's a few hour drive? So she was like,
Was the line longer than like the testing lines we've been seeing on TV? Or do you get a test with your Milos?
She said it was actually no problem, but that she was going to eat a meal outside in her car and then decided she wanted to get another one before she left and drove back to Nashville.
So did she use the bathroom somewhere? At some point, she must have gotten out of her car. Yes.
Well, I was going to say that. What was that? That ridiculous thing that people used to wear to
Stadium Pal.
A Stadium Pal. Yes. I think those
sorry,
are good for
it was
movies.
on the tip of my tongue, but it was. I don't know what to tell you.
Very nice. All right. This episode was sponsored by Stadium Pal. Get your Stadium Pal online.
And one of the local breweries of mine that I worry is going to struggle because it's hard out there for breweries. Love you, Rockaway Brewing Company. They did not pay me, so sponsor in the sense of they sold me that beer.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Carl. This was lovely. How would you rate this podcast on a scale of 1 to 10? We're going to go back to our previous one.
7.8. How about you?
Good. I think that this is 5% better than our last one. So
if we keep at that pace,
yep,
break
exactly.
the scale.
That's right.
Exponential growth.
Sounds great. Anything else we need to cover before we head out?
Need is a strong word. I think we're good.
All right, good. Well, I'll be here. Hit me up in my Zoom. I'll be there from 3 to 5. I'll talk to you.
Excellent.
All right. Bye, Carl.
Bye, David. All right, I'm going to stop recording.
All right.